Chapter 3 of the Amateur Immigrant. This LibriVox recording is in the public domain. The Amateur Immigrant by Robert Louis Stevenson. Steerage Scenes. Our companion, Steerage No. 2 and 3, was a favourite resort. Down one flight of stairs there was a comparatively large open space, the centre occupied by a hatchway, which made a convenient seat for about 20 persons, while barrels, coils of rope, and the carpenter's bench afforded perches for perhaps as many more. The canteen, or steerage bar, was on one side of the stair. On the other, a no less attractive spot, the cabin of the indefatigable interpreter. I have seen people packed into this space like herrings in a barrel, and many merry evenings prolonged there till 5 bells, when the lights were ruthlessly extinguished and all must go to roost. It had been rumoured since Friday that there was a fiddler aboard who lay sick and unmelodious in Steerage No. 1, and on the Monday forenoon, as I came down the companion, I was saluted by something in Strathspey time. A white-faced Orpheus was cheerily playing to an audience of white-faced women. It was as much as he could do to play, and some of his hearers were scarce able to sit, yet they had crawled from their bunks at the first experimental flourish, and found better than medicine in the music. Some of the heaviest heads began to nod in time, and a degree of animation looked from some of the palest eyes. Humanly speaking, it is a more important matter to play the fiddle even badly than to write huge works upon recondite subjects. What could Mr. Darwin have done for these sick women? But this fellow scraped away, and the world was positively a better place for all who heard him. We have yet to understand the economical value of these mere accomplishments. I told the fiddler he was a happy man, carrying happiness about him in his fiddle case, and he seemed alive to the fact. "It is a privilege," I said. He thought a while upon the word, turning it over in his Scots head, and then answered with conviction, "Yes, a privilege." That night I was summoned by Merrily Danced the Quaker's Wife into the companion of Steerage No. 4 and 5. This was, properly speaking, but a strip across a deck-house, lit by a sickly lantern which swung to and fro with the motion of the ship. Through the open slide door we had a glimpse of a grey night sea, with patches of phosphorescent foam flying, swift as birds, into the wake, and the horizon rising and falling as the vessel rolled in the wind. In the centre the companion ladder plunged down sheerly like an open pit. Below, on the first landing, and lighted by another lamp, lads and lasses danced, not more than 3 at a time for lack of space, in jigs and reels and hornpipes. Above, on either side, there was a recess railed with iron, perhaps 2 feet wide and 4 feet long, which stood for orchestra and seats of honour. In the one balcony 5 slatternly Irish lasses sat woven in a comely group. In the other was posted Orpheus, his body, which was convulsively in motion, forming an odd contrast to his somnolent, imperturbable Scots face. His brother, a dark man with a vehement, interested countenance, who made a god of the fiddler, sat by with open mouth, drinking in the general admiration and throwing out remarks to kindle it. "That's a bonny hornpipe now," he would say. "It's a great favourite with performers. They dance the sand dance to it." And he expounded the sand dance. Then suddenly it would be a long hush with uplifted finger and glowing, supplicating eyes. "He's going to play 'Auld Robin Grey' on one string." And throughout this excruciating movement, "On one string, that's on one string," he kept crying. I would have given something myself that it had been on none, but the hearers were much awed. I called for a tune or two, and thus introduced myself to the notice of the brother, who directed his talk to me for some little while, keeping, I need hardly mention, true to his topic, like the seaman to the star. "He's grand of it," he said confidently. "His master was a music-hall man." Indeed, the music-hall man had left his mark, for our fiddler was ignorant of many of our best old airs. Lurgy of Buchan, for instance, he knew only as a quick jigging figure in the set of quadrilles, and had never heard it called by name. Perhaps, after all, the brother was the more interesting performer of the two. I have spoken with him afterward repeatedly, and found him always the same quick, fiery bit of a man, not without brains, but he never showed such advantage as when he was thus squiring the fiddler into public note. There is nothing more becoming than a genuine admiration, and it shares this with love, that it does not become contemptible, although misplaced. The dancing was but feebly carried on. The space was almost impracticably small, and the Irish wenches combined the extreme of bashfulness about this innocent display with a surprising impudence and roughness of address. Most often either the fiddle lifted up its voice unheeded, or only a couple of lads would be footing it and snapping fingers on the landings. And such was the eagerness of the brother to display all the acquirements of his idol, and such the sleepy indifference of the performer, that the tune would as often as not be changed, and the hornpipe expire into a ballad before the dancers had cut half a dozen shuffles. In the meantime, however, the audience had been growing more and more numerous every moment. There was hardly standing room round the top of the companion, and the strange instinct of the race moved some of the newcomers to close both doors, so that the atmosphere grew insupportable. It was a good place, as the saying is, to leave. The wind hauled ahead with a head sea. By 10 at night heavy sprays were flying and drumming over the forecastle. The companion of Steerage No. 1 had to be closed, and the door of communication through the second cabin thrown open. Either from the convenience of the opportunity, or because we already had a number of acquaintances in that part of the ship, Mr. Jones and I paid it a late visit. Steerage No. 1 is shaped like an isosceles triangle, the sides opposite the equal angles bulging outward with the contour of the ship. It is lined with 8 pens of 16 bunks apiece, 4 bunks below and 4 above on each side. At night the place is lit with 2 lanterns, one to each table. As the steamer beat on her way among the rough billows, the light passed through violent phases of change, and was thrown to and fro and up and down with startling swiftness. You were tempted to wonder, as you looked, how so thin a glimmer could control and disperse such solid blackness. When Jones and I entered, we found a little company of our acquaintances seated together at the triangular foremost table. A more forlorn party, in more dismal circumstances, it would be hard to imagine. The motion here in the ship's nose was very violent, the uproar of the sea often overpoweringly loud. The yellow flicker of the lanterns sprung round and tossed the shadows in masses. The air was hot, but it struck a chill from its foetor. From all around in the dark bunks, the scarcely human voices of the sick joined into a kind of farmyard chorus. In the midst, these 5 friends of mine were keeping up what heart they could in company. Singing was their refuge from discomfortable thoughts and sensations. One piped in feeble tones, "Oh, why ha' I left my home?" which seemed to be a pertinent question in the circumstances. Another, from the invisible horrors of a pen where he lay dog-sick upon the upper shelf, found courage, in a blink of his sufferings, to give us several verses of the death of Nelson, and it was odd and eerie to hear the chorus breathe feebly from all sorts of dark corners, and "this day has done his duty" rise and fall and be taken up again in this dim inferno, to an accompaniment of plunging, hollow-sounding bows and the rattling spray showers overhead. All seemed unfit for conversation. A certain dizziness had interrupted the activity of their minds, and except to sing they were tongue-tied. There was present, however, one tall, powerful fellow of doubtful nationality, being neither quite a Scotsman or altogether Irish, but of surprising clearness of conviction on the highest problems. He had gone nearly beside himself on the Sunday, because of a general backwardness to endorse his definition of mind, as a living, thinking substance which cannot be felt, heard, or seen, nor, I presume, though he failed to mention it, smelt. Now he came forward in a pause with another contribution to our culture. "Just by way of a change," he said, "I'll ask you a scripture riddle." "There's profit in them too," he added ungrammatically. This was the riddle. C and P did agree to cut down C, but C and P could not agree without the leave of G. All the people cried to see the cruelty of C and P. Harsh are the words of Mercury after the songs of Apollo. We were a long while over the problem, shaking our heads and gloomily wondering how a man could be such a fool. But at length he put us out of suspense, and divulged the fact that C and P stood for Caiaphas and Pontius Pilate. I think it must have been the riddle that settled us, but the motion and close air likewise hurried our departure. We had not been gone long, we heard next morning, ere 2 or even 3 out of the 5 fell sick. We thought it little wonder on the whole, for the sea kept contrary all night. I now made my bed upon the second cabin floor, where, although I ran the risk of being stepped on, I had a free current of air, more or less vitiated indeed, and running only from steerage to steerage, but at least not stagnant, and from this couch, as well as the usual sounds of a rough night at sea, the hateful coughing and retching of the sick and the sobs of children, I heard a man run wild with terror, beseeching his friend for encouragement. "The ship's going down," he cried with a thrill of agony. "The ship's going down," he repeated, now in a blank whisper, now with his voice rising towards a sob. And his friend might reassure him, reason with him, joke at him. All was in vain, and the old cry came back, "The ship's going down." There was something panicky and catching in the emotion of his tones, and I saw in a clear flash what an involved and hideous tragedy was a disaster to an emigrant's ship. If this whole parishful of people came no more to land, into how many houses would the newspaper carry woe, and what a great part of the web of our corporate human life would be rent across for ever. The next morning when I came on deck I found a new world indeed. The wind was fair, the sun mounted into a cloudless heaven, through great dark blue seas the ship cut a swathe of curded foam. The horizon was dotted all day with companionable sails, and the sun shone pleasantly on the long heaving deck. We had many fine weather diversions to beguile the time. There was a single chessboard and a single pack of cards. Sometimes as many as 20 of us would be playing dominoes for love. Feats of dexterity, puzzles for the intelligent, some arithmetical, some of the same order as the old problem of the fox and goose and cabbage, were always welcome, and the latter I observed more popular as well as more conspicuously well done than the former. We had a regular daily competition to guess the vessel's progress, and 12 o'clock, when the result was published in the wheelhouse, came to be a moment of considerable interest. But the interest was unmixed. Not a bet was laid upon our guesses. From the Clyde to Sandy Hook I never heard a wager offered or taken. We had, besides, romps in plenty. Puss in the Corner, which we had rebaptised in a more manly style, Devil and Four Corners, was my own favourite game, but there were many who preferred another, the humour of which was to box a person's ears till he found out who had cuffed him. This Tuesday morning we were all delighted with the change of weather, and in the highest possible spirits. We got in a cluster like bees, sitting between each other's feet under lee of the deck-houses. Stories and laughter went around. The children climbed about the shrouds. White faces appeared for the first time and began to take on colour from the wind. I was kept hard at work, making cigarettes for one amateur after another, and my less than moderate skill was heartily admired. Lastly, down sat the fiddler in our midst, and began to discourse his reels and jigs and ballads, with now and then a voice or two to take up the air and throw in the interest of human speech. Through this merry and good-hearted scene there came 3 cabin passengers, a gentleman and 2 young ladies, picking their way with little gracious titters of indulgence, and a lady bountiful air about nothing, which galled me to the quick. I have little of the radical in social questions, and have always nourished an idea that one person was as good as another, but I began to be troubled by this episode. It was astonishing what insults these people managed to convey by their presence. They seemed to throw their clothes in our faces. Their eyes searched us all over for tatters and incongruities. A laugh was ready at their lips, but they were too well-mannered to indulge it in our hearing. Wait a bit till they are all back in the saloon, and then hear how wittily they would depict the manners of the steerage. We were, in truth, very innocently, cheerfully, and sensibly engaged, and there were no shadows of excuse for the swaying elegant superiority with which these damsels passed amongst us, or for the stiff and waggish glances of their squire. Not a word was said, only when they were gone Mackay suddenly damned their impudence under his breath, but we were all conscious of an icy influence and a dead break in the course of our enjoyment. End of Part 3.